Good morning, Susannah. Welcome to my podcast, One for the Road. How are you today?
Oh, I'm good, Dave. Thank you. How are you?
I'm fine. We met up a few weeks ago. We did a lovely walk in the countryside, didn't we? And we had a
We
really,
did.
yeah, we had a really interesting conversation. And when I left there, I thought, do you know what? I need to ask you to be a guest on my podcast. And here you are. So thank you so much for joining me.
No, thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Good, good. So this is where it all begins. You grew up in Kent near Tunbridge
Mhm.
Wells. Let's go from there.
Yeah, so I grew up in a little village outside Tunbridge Wells called Brenchley. I'm the youngest of three girls. I've got two big sisters, and there's quite a large age gap. So they are 9 and 11 years older than me. And I was really privileged. I had a really blessed upbringing with two wonderful parents. My father worked very hard in the city. We had a lovely house, beautiful garden. My mum was a garden designer, so we had a beautiful garden. And yeah, we were really, really, really lucky and very blessed growing up. Um, I did. I was sent away to boarding school when I was 7. There was a few issues around I was dyslexic, but they didn't know that at the time. And the school that I was in was just our sort of local school, and they didn't think it was necessarily right for me. And so they moved me further away to Broadstairs, which was an hour away. But I did have to start boarding, and I was terribly homesick, really, really homesick. I found it very difficult to be away from home, to be away from my mum in particular. I found that very hard. And I don't think my mum found it very easy either. And yeah, I was also, because my birthday's in September, I was also I wasn't in the right year group. So I was put in a year ahead of myself. So I was with people sometimes over a year older than me, and that had a bit of a knock-on effect to my confidence really throughout my whole life actually. And I only really realized that a few years ago. So I was competing with people and comparing myself to other children who were older than me, and of course, and plus the dyslexia, I wasn't really able to keep up. So that happened. I was terribly homesick, so they did move me at 11 to another school, another boarding school, but it was closer to home. And that was when I was 11. And I did really enjoy that actually. And I met some really great friends, but I was quite naughty at that school. Let's put it that way. I found my confidence. I got some good friends, but I did sort of start playing up a bit. Nothing, nothing too bad. I didn't get into a lot of trouble, but I was a bit cheeky and just, yeah, I can see a lot of it actually in one of my children now, just a little bit, pushing the boundaries, I guess you could say that. Um, Drinking started being kind of started featuring for sort of that group of friends, probably around 13 or 14, of which I didn't actually get involved. I always tried to sort of stay away from it. I'm not quite sure why. My parents weren't big drinkers. They'd have these sort of quite glamorous dinner parties, and I would sit on the top of the stairs, and I could hear all the sort of the laughter and the clinking of glasses and everything downstairs, and it just seemed really sort of glamorous to me. Um, I I was always a bit afraid of people getting drunk, even from an early age. I remember that, and I don't know if it was that I saw something on TV or what happened, but there was definitely something at the back of my mind, just not wanting, especially my parents to get drunk or get tipsy. And yeah, so some of my friends at 13, 14 started drinking. They'd smuggle, we were obviously at a boarding school, they'd smuggle vodka, those little small bottles of vodka into the school. And yeah, and I just remember for me, I managed to say no, and I didn't really want to get involved in that until I was probably maybe 15. And bearing in mind, I was then hanging out with people who were a year older than me. So they were all 16 and I was still 15. And we'd start going to the pubs at like exeat weekends, which are the weekends when you're allowed out home, or to London. We'd go to London and stay with friends. And I think because my parents, I was so much younger than my two older sisters, they definitely gave me a lot of free rein. There wasn't a huge amount of sort of control or parenting going on. They were always there for me. My mum was amazing, amazing woman and amazing mum. But I don't think there was a huge amount of parenting. She didn't really know what I was getting up to. I remember actually there was one particular time, it was just after my GCSE, so I was 15 and we were in Portugal, and I went on holiday with my parents, and we were staying in this place called Valdelobo, and there were lots of children my age, and it was really fun. But I was allowed out till about 4 a.m, age 15. And to me, like now with my own children, I just think what was happening. And I'd roll home after drinking. I don't know what I was drinking, cider or vodka Rebels or something like that. And I don't ever remember being sick or anything, but I was very good at tennis. And I was in a tennis camp, which is one of the reasons why we're in Portugal. And I'd have these tennis lessons starting at 8, and I'd come in at 4 a.m. after we did these. We'd just be in these bars with all these Portuguese people, all these locals, and just loads of teenagers. And it was bizarre actually, and really dangerous. Like I put myself in quite a few dangerous like situations with local people, age 15, and I definitely wasn't mature enough to sort of be dealing with that. But yeah, didn't seem to be much parenting going on, and I wasn't ever told off for it. So it just sort of, materialized. It just sort of happened. And then I moved schools again after my GCSEs, and I moved to a mixed boarding school, up in Buckinghamshire, so still boarding. And that's when I definitely did start drinking at school. We had this thing that it was called skanking, and we'd basically break out of the house that we slept in at 3 a.m. and go and drink vodka in the grounds. And also, if it was someone's birthday, we'd wake up at 5 a.m. and go and drink before breakfast. And I don't really think about that very often. But I mean, even that initially, I don't know if that's a normal, teenage thing to do. But, that I'd be pretty disappointed if my children were doing that now, to be honest, and really worried. So that sort of happened. And I think for me, my drinking didn't really start to escalate until my 30s because of some, big traumatic events that happened to me in my early 20s. Once I left that school after my A-levels, I went traveling for a year, and I went to Australia. But I think I was social drinking then. I was just, there weren't any sort of spectacular, awful drunken stories or anything. And I definitely wasn't aware of any issues. I was just doing what everyone else was doing. But I did always suffer from really bad hangovers from an early age, and my tolerance wasn't great. So I didn't need to drink a lot for it to really impact me physically. And I would quite often get head spins and then be sick. And there was no second wind. Like if that happened, that was it. I was out. And then feel pretty shocking the next day as well. And that happened, pretty much from my 20s. But the first big life altering moment, I kind of call it a grenade moment, when something goes off in your life and nothing's going to be the same again, and you're going along a path and suddenly you're veered in a different direction. And that for me was the 14th of October 2003, when my mum really suddenly died. As I said before, like I was really, really close to her, and we spoke a lot. I was living in London then, and we spoke all the time. And it was really sudden. She was looking after my sister's children. My sister was away on holiday for a week, and she was looking after her 3 young children in London, where my sister lived, and I lived in a flat in London as well. And she was complaining about a sort of a headache, and she was feeling quite tired. And she called me, and I was out for dinner, and I was with a friend of mine, and she called me and she said, I really don't feel well. And I was in Fulham and she was in Wandsworth, so I was only about a 15-20 minute drive, and I didn't go see her. And that really, I struggled with that, Dave, for a long time, because the guilt I felt around that I didn't go was immense for me. She did say, don't come, I'm fine, but I should have, now, knowing what I know now, I would have gone. There was an au pair in the house, but for some reason, I think she was upstairs and she didn't know what was happening, but my mum called 111, and we've got the transcript of what happened, because we wanted to know exactly what was happening, because they didn't send an ambulance and they should have sent an ambulance. So there was a lot of speculation, like, did they do their job properly, what happened? But ultimately she had a stroke. And so when she was in the transcript, it actually says, she said in her own words, you probably think I'm drunk, but I'm not, because she was obviously slurring, she couldn't talk properly, and she'd lost the feeling down her whole right side of her body. She managed to call. She didn't phone me at this point. I wish she had, but she didn't. And I honestly do think it's because she just didn't want to worry me. But she called the neighbours next door, and they came round, and my mum managed to drag herself across the floor and managed to open the door, and then they took her straight to hospital. They went to St George's in Tooting, and the thought of how scared she must have been, and it's just awful. And I so wish that she had called me. I don't think about that night very much, to be honest, because it's so difficult. Even after 20 years, it's so difficult to go there. But then what happened, she got to the hospital and she had a huge brain hemorrhage, and they found out she had leukemia, acute myeloid leukemia, and it was progressive, and even if they caught it early, I don't think they would have been able to do anything. But she was such a fighter that she didn't complain about being tired. She didn't tell us about if she had any symptoms at all. I mean, I wish she had gone to the doctor, but she didn't. And my dad then obviously was in Kent, and he came up to be with her, but he also didn't phone me that night, and he was with her in the hospital, and she was on a machine, obviously life support machine, and he made the decision by himself, which has been quite a difficult one for me to deal with, to turn it off before I was there or before I was told. So one of my sisters is in Dubai at this time, one of them's in the Caribbean. I was in London, 15-20 minutes away from the hospital, and he didn't call me, and he turned it off at 6 o'clock in the morning, I think it was, or 6:45 the next day. And on the 14th. And that's been really a difficult one for me to deal with, to be honest. He had to do what he had to do, and I don't think he was obviously thinking straight, but I just wish that I'd had a chance, to see her and say goodbye. So I just turned 23 at this point in October, and obviously that was a huge shock for me. I was very young, and I was quite happy-go-lucky until that time, and I hadn't really had to deal with anything of severity up until then. And I was going out with a lovely man called Will at the time. He was really supportive, and he was fantastic, actually. We decided to go to Thailand that Christmas, so 3 months after my mum died. because I didn't want to be at home, really. It was too difficult to be at home. I think my sisters were doing things with their in-laws, and my dad was going to want to go there. And I just found it very difficult to go home with my mum not there. There was never any food in the house. The house was always in a bit of a mess. It was just so clear there was a massive void in that house, and it was very hard for me to go back there. So we made the decision to go to Thailand, and we went to a little island called Koh Phi Phi, which is a stunning island. It's very, very small, and we were there at Christmas. And in Thailand, they celebrate Christmas Eve as like a bigger day than Christmas Day itself. And we had quite a big night on Christmas Eve. And it was his birthday on the 23rd of December, actually, as well. So we had a big night, the 23rd, big night, the 24th. And the 25th, Christmas Day, we didn't do anything. We took it easy. We went to bed early. We just had a really nice day, in the sunshine. But thank goodness we didn't drink, or we didn't go out that night, because the next morning we woke up to an earthquake. I wasn't fully aware it was an earthquake, because it was just felt like a minor tremor, but we definitely felt something. And we went to have breakfast in the hotel, and we were checking out that morning, actually, because we were going to go to another island. And as we were walking back to we were in a kind of nice little hut. It was really pretty, like it's sort of within a sort of jungle on the beach, really. And we were walking back, and we suddenly heard these screams of water, run, and just people running in different directions. And I had no idea what was going on at all. We just decided to run in one direction, and there was a little house. I guess it's all tourist accommodation there, but we ran, and there was a sort of porch area, a balcony that we went onto, and there were a couple of other people up there, and that's when I saw the first wave coming towards us. And the noise is something that I'll never forget. The first tsunami wave coming, and it was like the only way that I can describe it was like a sort of dishwasher noise, but amplified. It was so loud, like a sort of jet engine, and just this wall of water, which looks from where we were like 50 foot high, and it just was taking everything with it. There was people standing there that were just getting swallowed up by the water. It was crashing through palm trees, and it was just hurtling towards us. And I just didn't know what. I just didn't even know what was going on. Honestly, I thought this was it. I thought there's no way that anyone can survive this. And it came crashing into the building that we were in, and there was people in the water around us, and my boyfriend was holding on to me, and I just remember just the screams. It was so horrendous, Dave. Like I think I've managed somehow in my mind to block it out, because I think you feel like you're in a horror film. It's like you're watching some massive CGI production. It was, yeah, truly terrifying. And there was this little 3-year-old boy, maybe younger, and he was by himself. And I picked him up, and he'd soiled his pants, and he was crying, and I was just holding him. And I saw later on, actually, we found his mum, thank God. But it was, yeah, there were injured people everywhere, and luckily we were in a situation where we could help people. But the next 24 hours was terrifying, because it was sort of before we had a phone, but obviously there was no reception. There was no internet, no electricity. all the water pipes had been completely destroyed. So none of the taps, and even the higher hotels that we managed to get into, there was a big hotel block that was being used as a sort of hospital where all the injured people were going. But for 24 hours, no one came. And because there was no connection with the outside world, we didn't know if this was happening. Is this like a, Armageddon? Has this happened around the whole world? Or is this just where we are? And I remember thinking, which is crazy, like, oh, maybe this happens the whole time in Thailand. I just didn't know. That was my thinking. I just thought, oh, maybe this just happens, and I wasn't aware of it. And then there was a few incredible people who really took control of the situation, and there were some doctors there, and they were making choices when the helicopters did finally come to fly people to Phuket and Bangkok. People were being flown to hospitals all over Thailand. We had to make decisions like whose injuries, who should get on these helicopters first, because lying down you can only put 4 people in, and we were like, well, this person isn't going to make it, so we couldn't put them in the helicopter. And then other people who had severe injuries but could tolerate, being in the helicopter, we were putting them in. But then there were other people with serious injuries, like someone with a missing arm, and it was a situation like it was a war zone, and I had never been exposed, obviously, to anything like that at all, and it was terrifying, and you don't know how you're going to react. And I hope we definitely, helped as many people as we could, but it was, sorry, okay. I don't really talk about it very much, so yeah, I think, we had to make some tough decisions. And that night we were on top of this 4 or 5 story building, and someone had a remote, like a intercom, and they were talking to one of the ships. There was a Navy ship outside, kind of a few miles off the coast, and they were sending they wanted to send some boats in basically the next day, but they kept saying that there's another wave coming. So the whole night I was in this state, well, everyone was, this state of anxiety, fight or flight, like this could happen again, another wave's going to come. It didn't come, but we were in this 4-foot concrete hotel, but its foundations are sand. You're on this tiny island, and we didn't know if it was going to withhold or stand up, and for that whole 12 hours that, no one slept, obviously. It was terrifying, that whole experience. We did get off the island the next day, and we went to another little hotel, but we'd sort of lost everything. We lost, obviously, all our stuff and everything. And then I was able to call my dad to say that we were okay, and my sisters. And actually, a friend of mine had seen us on Sky News. He'd seen my boyfriend on Sky News, and actually managed to call my dad and said that he'd seen us and that we were helping with the rescue. So thank goodness my dad, because he'd just lost his wife 3 months ago, and before this, and he must have been terrified as well. He's never really talked to me about it, but he must have been terrified, same as my sisters. So that happened. And the trauma combined with having just lost my mum and then the tsunami was so immense that none of my friends knew how to deal with it. Of course, why would they? And we just got sucked back into this London lifestyle where we were going out on a Thursday, Friday night, partying, going to clubs, and then you could go to work on 2-3 hours sleep, and that was just what I was 22, 23, and that's just sort of what we did for the next few years.
Did you disassociate yourself from it, do you think, when you come back? Because that whole story you told me, I can't even describe how I feel. So I'm sure the listeners are feeling the same, losing your mum suddenly like that, and then getting away on this dream island and being terrified, especially when they said there's another one coming and you're just waiting for it to swallow you up. But not just that, getting off the island, I imagine, was just as terrifying. And then you come back and it sounds like you carried on with life, and it was the most horrific few months anyone could go through, really.
Do you know what? That's exactly it. Like, it was such a nightmare that I don't think I could even go there.
Yeah.
I found it difficult to talk about it. My boyfriend basically refused to talk about it, just the way that he dealt with it. So I almost didn't want to become like a victim, because there were so many people who died. You know, I think it was 250,000 people died in the Boxing Day tsunami, and I was one of the lucky ones. Which now I can see that I am lucky, but at the time I felt really unlucky to even be there after everything had happened. Do you know what, actually, when you said that about getting off the island, there was one family that just really sticks in my mind. We were on the boat leaving, and it was just like you know, something you'd see on the news, like people injured, you know, no one's got any belongings, you know, ripped, dirty clothing. And there was a lady there, and we'd seen her, you know, when you're on holiday and you kind of recognize the same faces and same families, and I saw her, and I think she was Scandinavian anyway, like really beautiful, blonde hair, tall, and she was there, and she had 2 boys with her, and I know that she had 3, because she was staying at the same hotel as us, and she had 3 boys and a husband, and one of the boys wasn't on the boat and the husband wasn't on the boat, and they were all sobbing. And I don't know what happened, but either way, she left with 2 of those sons and left her husband and the son on the island. Whether or not one of them had died or both of them had died, or the husband was there trying to look for him, I don't know, but that really sums it up. That's basically what it was. People were leaving to look after their living children, but possibly leaving a spouse, or, you know, there's so many horrendous stories. Like, you had to make that decision what you wanted to do, and we were lucky that we were leaving together. But honestly, those next few months in London I was in complete denial, really. I wasn't offered any trauma counselling, which I definitely should have had, or grief counselling, or both. My friends were great, but they didn't know how to handle it. Of course, we were 23, 24. So yeah, it was mad. And actually, I've just remembered something else that happened a couple of months after that. So it would have been February time. I actually had my drink spiked in a bar. So we were in a pub in Fulham, and I was at the bar, and I was buying a round of drinks, and I had a vodka cranberry, and I was actually with a group of my boyfriends, just a group of guys, and there might have been a couple of girls, but I bought some beers for them, and I bought a vodka cranberry, and I took a couple of the drinks back, and basically there was this guy at the bar, he was chatting me up, asked for my number, and I said no, and I think I was probably quite rude to him, to be honest, because at the time I didn't want to have this conversation with him. So I was quite rude. I was like, my boyfriend's over there, like, leave me alone. Anyway, I took some of the drinks back. It was quite obvious which one was my drink, because I left it on the bar with another pint, went back to get those, and this was my first drink, and I drank it, and I remember feeling really suddenly really sick and really dizzy, and I managed somehow to get down into the bathroom of the pub. It was downstairs, and I locked myself in there, and basically I passed out. I don't know what it was, but I passed out. Some of my friends managed to come down and get me out, took me onto the street, and I know it was February time because it was freezing cold, and I was wearing like a little vest top, but I was sweating, and I was lying on the pavement outside this pub. And, you know, that alone is quite a significant event. And I didn't even talk about it. I almost laughed it off. I think I just kind of pretended like it hadn't really happened, and didn't really discuss it. And it's certainly not something that I talk about now. But we called the I called the hospital the next day, and I called the police, and I said this is what's happened, and I spoke to the people at the bar, and I had to get a test. That's right, they had to do a urine test at the hospital. So they said that they found Rohypnol or something. Can't remember exactly what it was. And the pub said, yeah, we've had a few instances recently. And I just remember thinking like how shocking that whole situation was. But yeah, nothing was done about it, and I definitely I didn't talk about it anymore. And a few months later, I mean, it's sort of laughable, Dave, when these things happen, because now talking about it, like, when at the time it just felt like things couldn't get any worse, and I felt like a real victim. Even though I wasn't drinking to block this out, I don't think I was just doing what everyone else was doing. But I don't know if it was an abuse that happened or what the right terminology is, but on the tube, I was someone ejaculated on me on the tube. So this was the following year. So this is 2004. So it would be sometime that year. So I was still 23. And you're crammed into a tube train, and I didn't really know what was going on. This guy was just basically rubbing himself against me, and I couldn't really see because I think he was behind me, and it all happened very quickly. And then, I mean, it was awful. It was awful. Thinking about it now, I'm almost more disturbed than I was, because I think I was living in this sort of dream world, because I couldn't associate with any of these bad things that were happening to me. But now I was like, I feel so awful for that 23-year-old who was going through all of that stuff. Like, my nieces are now that age, and I just think how sad, like how awful that she wasn't able to. That's how I look at myself, because I look at myself as if it's a different person, because that's how I feel now, especially after my sobriety. But I look at this person, I'm just like, this is just heartbreaking. All of these things were happening. So yeah, sorry, it's a lot of information, but so those are some things that happened in my 20s. But I felt this sort of, I also, I was in this relationship with a great guy, and I managed to push him away because I think I was self-sabotaging, and I think that's how certain these traumas sort of ended up affecting me. I was self-sabotaging. I was really terrified of abandonment. I had some serious abandonment issues. I treated him quite badly, but I was also terrified of him leaving, because I felt that my mum had left me, and then all of these bad things were happening. So I was also desperate for a kind of a relationship, like a long-term relationship, and that's all I wanted. I thought that if I get married, I want the security, then everything will get better. And that's sort of, I was more looking for that rather than like a healthy, partnership. So yeah, it was a lot. There was a lot going on.
Yeah, you were looking for a solution, and you were blocking everything out, which is understandable, the disassociation. But it's probably where the drinking came in to keep you disassociated, right?
I think so. Even at this stage, my drinking sort of stayed normal-ish, social drinking. I definitely wasn't drinking daily. I'd probably be binge drinking, when we go out and things like that. I met my now husband when I was 26, and I worked on a program called Shipwrecks. I don't know if you remember it, with T4.
Yeah.
And we were out in the Cook Islands actually, for a couple of months, and I met him there. But he was a few years younger than me, and I ended up breaking up with him. I dumped him when we got back, because I thought he was a bit immature. He was 23 or 24 at the time, and so as soon as that relationship ended, I then looked for somebody I wanted to marry, basically, and it happened really, really quickly. So I married my ex-husband, who's also the father of my eldest son. We got engaged after 4 months, which says a lot. We were so badly suited. We had nothing in common, but I just wanted the security, and I thought that I was in love with him. And I'm not going to talk too much about that relationship because obviously it's the father of my eldest son.
Yeah.
And that's his story to tell. But basically, it ended really, really badly. And I left when my son was 4 months old. And then got back together with my now husband quite soon after that. And I should probably talk actually a little bit about what happened with my eldest son, because I had something called preeclampsia, which is really dangerous for pregnant women. He was 6 weeks premature and he was 4 pounds when he was born, but I had a pretty bad experience in the hospital as well around that when he was born. And basically what I was mistreated in the hospital. So I was in a lot of pain. I went to the hospital. They told me I had a urine infection, but I knew that there was something really seriously wrong. Like, I was in agony, I was being sick. And this was 6 weeks before he was obviously due. I'd come up in this horrendous rash. I'd blown up. My face was all swollen. And the midwife basically dismissed me and told me to go home. And I basically refused to go. So I sat in the waiting room, and thank goodness I did, because I started hemorrhaging and I collapsed. And within 11 minutes, they call it an immediate C-section, which is sort of more extreme than an emergency C-section. It means this is a life or death situation. Mother and baby aren't going to make it unless this baby comes out now. So I had this immediate C-section within 11 minutes. And I was so sort of traumatized by it that I began getting this really overprotective with my son. I didn't want anyone else to hold him. I didn't want anyone else to look after him. Because he was so little, he had this thing called reflux. So he couldn't hold his milk down properly, and he'd been in intensive care for 2 weeks. And that whole situation as well, I think that's when it started to change for me. And I was like, I can't deal with this is too much.
Yeah.
This is all too much for me. And when we did get home, I think that's when I did start drinking more. Even then, I wasn't daily drinking, so I was in my early 30s, but I definitely was using it more to medicate, I think.
At home now, and because you mentioned before it's more the social drinking, but now it was at home.
Yeah, it definitely shifted, not only because I was at home by myself with him because my husband then had left, but it was that's what I was doing. I was probably drinking. I think it was somewhere in the next 5 or 6 years when it started to become a problem for me. The big turning point for me when I knew there was a problem was in 2020, and that was after my third baby was born. And a very similar situation happened with him than it did with my first. Except he was actually more unwell when he was born, and he had to have this something called a pneumothorax. And they came to wake me up at 2 a.m, and they the doctors turned the lights on. They came I was in a private room because they put me in there, and they turned the lights on and they said, you need to sign this bit of paper. Your baby's not okay. Like, it's touch and go, basically, whether or not he's going to live throughout the night. You need to sign this. And I didn't know what was going on, and I just signed it. And I'm obviously there by myself. My husband's at home with my other 2 children. And at that point, I was like, I can't cope with this anymore. And I remember calling one of my best friends, just sobbing. I'm just like, this is too much. Like, I can't deal with it all. It's too much. I refused to go down to NICU, which is where my baby was in intensive care. My husband went down. I was just like, I couldn't. Every time I went down there, I'd faint. It was just all overwhelming. And I got him home when he was 3 or 4 weeks old. And again, I had this sort of tiny baby, and I just couldn't cope, Dave. It was just all too much. So, you know, the grief that I hadn't coped with, the traumas, all of this stuff, like the fact that I could have lost one of my babies, you know, I wasn't dealing with it well, and I was drinking too much. And I was drinking probably most days, probably 5 nights a week at this stage. And I was very conscious that I would try and have days off. Try not to drink on a Monday. And this was when I was in that sort of moderation hell for 5 years, really, pretty much. Trying to moderate, not being able to moderate, failing and then beating myself up, hating myself, self-loathing, fear, shame, all of those things that and I felt broken. About 6 months before I stopped drinking, I knew there was an issue. No one else around me knew there was an issue. My husband thought I was drinking a bit too much. But I think more for him, he could tell that I was just really desperately unhappy. I'd have these awful depressive cycles. My anxiety was off the chart. Actually, that's something that we haven't talked about. But after the tsunami, I used to get these awful nightmares. And we didn't really talk about anxiety like we do now, because this was the early 2000s. But that's when my anxiety started. And I think honestly, for 20 years, I was living in this sort of fight or flight mode. And I was just like this ball of tension and anxiety and stress, which then compounded into these sort of depressive episodes that I got. I was put on antidepressants. I was put on an anxiety medication. Not once was I told to look at my drinking or asked how much I was drinking or anything like that. So I was taking antidepressants, which obviously weren't working. I got into a really dark place 6 months or so before I stopped drinking, and I was having suicidal thoughts. I had a plan as well, which I now know because of the courses that I'm doing, that's really dangerous. I had a plan. We live in a village, a really beautiful village in Hampshire, and we've got lots of woods around us. And I was having proper thoughts about what to do. Whether or not I would have actually ever done it, I don't know. I really hope that I wouldn't have, because of my children. I just don't think I could have ever done that. But it was terrifying me, and I felt broken, and I felt like I needed help, and I asked for help. I asked my GP for help. I was then seeing a therapist. I asked them for help, and I was basically shut down. My therapist just said to me that, oh, well, everybody, has a glass of wine at night. Everyone, does that to unwind. There's no issue there. And I was screaming, this isn't normal. I don't feel healthy. I was doing that classic thing when I was waking up at 8 in the morning with a pounding headache and swearing to myself that I'm not going to drink today. Going downstairs, there might have been half a bottle of wine left in the fridge, and I'd pour it away. And then at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, or even from 3 o'clock, I was thinking, oh God, I'm definitely I'd done a complete 180. I'm definitely going to drink tonight. I really need to drink tonight. I couldn't cope with the emotions that I was feeling. I felt overwhelmed. And then I would go to the shop on the way back from the school run and buy a bottle of wine. And the same thing would happen, just the same cycle. And I was stuck in this for months and months, waking up, feeling sick, just hating myself and being stuck in this horrible depression and feeling so lonely, full of anxiety. And I remember asking my husband, I just saying, please, like, I need help. Like, I need to do something. Like, this isn't normal. And he said, like, he was so supportive. I'm so lucky to have him. Honestly, he's just amazing. He's an amazing man. He's an amazing dad. But he didn't realize the extent of how unhappy I was. I don't think he he'd come home from work sometimes with a bottle of wine when I said I didn't want to drink this week. But then it was there and I'd drink it. And it wasn't him trying to make me drink or anything, but he thought he was doing me a favor because he knows that I, liked a glass of white wine. I just got stuck in this awful, awful situation. I couldn't find a way out at all.
Wow. And I'm interested as well with your husband. Is he a drinker? Because he doesn't sound.
So he doesn't drink much at all.
No.
He'd have had the odd glass of wine with me. I used to actually get quite annoyed with him
for sharing.
when like he'd sometimes I'd have a glass of wine. He'd be like, "Oh well, it's Sunday night. I'll have a glass of red wine," and I was like,
"Oh, that's
what are you doing?"
But
then I was like, I can't have my full bottle now.
Yeah, I know that one. But the reason I say it is because it sounds so innocent, him getting a bottle of wine, and it kind of proves that he didn't really get it, right? So, and that makes it even harder, doesn't it? Because then it becomes more secretive because you keep it all to yourself and you're in this real insular relationship with alcohol, aren't you? And it can make it so much harder, I think, to do something about it.
I thought there was something really wrong with me. I didn't think anyone else drank like me. There's this whole, I'm not going to go into it because it's too much of a big subject, but all the mummy wine culture, I deserve a glass of wine. I've got 3 young children, I've got a full-time job. Things are stressful. It's a treat for myself, but it wasn't a treat for me. I hated it and I hated doing it. And I wasn't in denial because I knew what I was doing. I just wanted it to stop. And I'd do dry January and I would stop for kind of weeks on end, but it was hell. It was hell because I was doing it all wrong. I was just waiting and I was counting down to that next drink. I was counting down to that Friday night when I
You were just counting the days. There was no growth there. It was almost like subliminally saying to yourself, "Oh, well, obviously I haven't got a problem with it because I can go for a few weeks." And I always say to people that come to me and they say, none of my friends are like me. And I say, because they don't talk to you about their drinking. And there's probably a lot of them that are, especially in the mummy wine culture, because I think with blokes, they brag about it. They go, they get in the van in the morning and they're like, "Oh my God, I've got such hangover." You wouldn't go in the playground and say to 3 mums, "Oh my God, I did 3 bottles of wine last night. What am I like?" Do you know what I mean? So you keep it to yourself and then it becomes horrific, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And it was all I was thinking about as well. Like, it's so toxic for my mind and obviously contributing hugely to my anxiety and my mental health issues. It was compounding, it's all of that stuff, all of the negative self-talk, the self-loathing, and everything makes you feel worse. And it's the one thing is the alcohol, and that was what was causing everything, and also stopping me from actually healing and processing all of this grief and dealing with this trauma. But not once did anyone tell me that. Like, I just didn't know. I didn't know that that's what it was. I thought if I did stop drinking, my life would be over, basically. I just thought it'd be boring and I'd have no friends and my life would be crap, basically.
The opposite. So it's always the opposite.
Yeah. I thought I'd still have the depression and the anxiety, but I just wouldn't be drinking.
And you wouldn't have any friends. Right. And it's interesting what you say about the doctors, right? Because that same happened to me. I wasn't asked about my drinking. And then I went back a few months later and saying I'm still as depressed. And he didn't, I was literally in and out within 90 seconds. He said, "Right, let's try 100 milligrams." And that's when I went psychotic, right? Literally went mad with the boozing and whatnot. And I hear it all the time about they just say, "Well, try AA or try reducing." And it really angers me because they say, if you've got a problem with alcohol, go and see a doctor. What? Why? Well, and now you can't even get a doctor's appointment as well. And on the news yesterday, I saw that there's a new report out saying that antidepressants, the prescriptions for them have doubled in the last couple of years, right? because that to them's a solution. I'm depressed. Okay, let's put you on antidepressants then. Not, okay, let's have a look at your lifestyle. How can we make changes in your lifestyle? It's immediately put you on antidepressants. And then you're in the loop of that with the alcohol. And some people take sleeping tablets, and you were on anti-anxiety tablets. I was on reflux tablets. I was on tablets to bring my cholesterol down, blood pressure tablets. So I was rattling as I was walking up the road and felt absolutely diabolical 24 hours a day. And not once was it mentioned about drinking.
I know. It is mad. It's mad, isn't it? I had this conversation with my GP and I was honest, and I was saying I'm drinking probably 5 or 6 bottles of wine a week, which might not sound like a huge amount, but I also had a very low tolerance. Like I would get really bad hangovers. So in my mind, I knew I couldn't really go over that bottle. And if I did, there would be trouble the next day. But my GP, just to ask me, the one question asked me if I was taking multivitamins. That's all he said.
Yeah.
And I remember, and actually they did give me the number for a local like an alcohol support group, but that was awful as well because I called them and the first thing she said to me was, don't go to the school pickup smelling of alcohol because then they'll call social services. That's what the response I got when I called this number, which is shocking and terrifying. Like, first off, I'm an amazing mum. Like, I know that. I'd never put my children in danger. I wasn't day drinking. I wasn't drinking in the morning. But do not say that to me, because when already you're terrified about how you're coming across and you're feeling ashamed, like I was feeling ashamed that I had to call this number anyway.
Yeah.
And then someone telling me that, I was terrified. Like that's my worst nightmare, is someone taking my children away from me. So that's what happened. And so obviously this, I won't mention what it's called, but that local support group was not good. It was not good.
That's awful. So let's go to the part in your life then that enough was enough. And I believe that was last year. Was it April?
Yeah, it was. It was April the 30th, 2022. So I've just done 19 months sober.
Congratulations.
And thank you so much. So yeah, that last night drinking, it wasn't anything spectacular. It wasn't, I didn't get arrested. I didn't crash a car. I didn't do anything. It was just a kind of quite a standard weekend situation. But I just woke up feeling awful. I was being sick. I had to do something that day in the village. There was like a run, like a sort of charity run thing, and I was marshalling, so I had to go up this hill, and I just felt awful. My head was pounding. We'd had some people over for dinner the night before, and I'd probably only had maybe a bottle and a half wine, maybe 2 bottles of white wine. And yeah, I just felt shocking. And I woke up and I just was like, I can't do this anymore. Can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. And this was a Sunday, and no, sorry, this was a Saturday. And then on the Monday night, I went to my first AA meeting. And I know that there's, lots of different opinions about AA, and some people have told me that I'm not an alcoholic. But for me, that got me sober. That helped me. The support they gave me was absolutely fantastic. And I think you don't have to be a really high, serious alcoholic. You can be a grey area drinker, a moderate drinker, because basically it's all of pretty much the same thing. The bar is so high, there's such a big spectrum of drinking categories almost before you end up on a park bench. There's so much in the middle, and anywhere in that middle ground can benefit from so many different types of, stopping drinking. But the other thing is, Dave, I didn't know that there was a sober community on Instagram. I didn't know about any of these amazing sober coaches. I didn't know about these groups. I didn't know any of that stuff at all, it's kind of a bit crazy to me, because I did listen to a few podcasts. I listened to yours. I listened to one in the US. I listened to Terry's. a few others. But I just didn't know there was a sort of Instagram community, which is just so helpful as well now. And so whether or not I would, do the same again, I'm not sure, but it helped me. And all I'm saying is that I haven't had a drink since that first meeting, and that's all the proof that I need, really.
Yeah. I always describe it as I've said it before, so I'm probably boring the listeners now, but it's my visualization is that we've all got our right to, or our own way of how we do it, right? And it's like you and me going shopping, and you take me into a shop, and I go, oh, it's not really for me, but let me take you into my shop, and you go, don't know, maybe. I might have a little look around, but I'm going to go back to my shop. So you can intermix the two, or have one or the other. There's so many different options now, and great. That's just brilliant, isn't it? Because I'm here with you today. You've just shared an incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing that, because that must have been difficult. Because before this interview, we had a little chat and said, I haven't really spoken about it. And you spoke so eloquently about it. So thank you. But you're here 19 months sober. We've met before. We had a lovely walk and a lovely lunch with a few of us in the community. You're happy. Your husband's happy, happy kids, great future ahead because you've stopped this terrible drug. So in a way, it doesn't really matter how you've done it, does it?
No, it doesn't matter at all. I think we all get the sort of the same end result, and everything that I've learned about myself, I've been able to process this grief. I've been able to deal with this trauma and leave it where it is. I don't regret anything that's happened now, and I don't feel like that victim anymore. I've been able to move forward and not worry so much about the future, not stress and live in the past. I'm living for the present. I'm enjoying my kids so much more. They love the fact that I don't drink. I'm lucky that two of them are really still very young, so they don't really remember. But they get very excited about kind of like Instagram followers and like podcasts and that sort of stuff, which is really nice. And I involve them in that. But yeah, everything's good, and I'm in a really good positive place. And I hardly have I still get the odd bit of anxiety and social anxiety, but nothing near, as how I was feeling before. And I had one depressive cycle around the 8-month mark, but otherwise I haven't had any, and that's mind blowing to me when I was getting it pretty much monthly.
That's one of the first thing that goes, the anxiety, isn't it? Of course, you got everything that goes on in life, but I think the nervous system calms down when you take away the alcohol, and it's just so reassuring to tell people that you can get changes quite quickly, can't you? Within a couple of weeks, you can start to really feel the benefits of not drinking. And I was going to lead on before we go, for people listening today, what bit of advice would you give them if they are currently on that hamster wheel of doomsville that I call, where we're waking up in the morning like you're pouring the wine down the sink, and by 3 o'clock you're thinking about nipping up the co-op because there's that change in the day, isn't there? What would you say to the listeners now?
Yeah, do you know what? This is kind of probably the main thing that I get asked about on my Instagram, like people messaging me. The main thing that I'd say, if you're sober curious and you're really struggling in that hamster wheel, as you say, listen to the podcast, read those books, reach out to the community, whether or not that's AA, a sober group, or a coach, whatever you need to do, but you've got to help yourself. I think that's so important. No one's going to come and save you, unfortunately. I always thought that someone would come and sweep in and save me and rescue me. That's what I wanted my husband to do, but it can't be that way. You have to do something to help yourself. And I think that's a really good starting point. But, you need people to talk to. And there are so many fantastic options now. So yeah, get informed and get help and ask for help.
I couldn't have said it any better. Honestly, that's the best advice. So I'm truly grateful for you joining me today. Thank you so much. And I hope to see you soon.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Dave. It's been lovely.